Imagine planting a tree this year. You dig the hole, lower the roots in, firm the soil around the base, and water it in. It looks small, maybe even fragile. Nothing about that moment feels historic. But decades from now, long after you have forgotten the exact day you planted it, that same tree is still standing, still fruiting, still dropping harvests into the hands of people who may not even remember you planted it. Children running through its shade, grandchildren picking fruit from branches you once held as a sapling. Some fruit trees are not just plants, they are decisions. Long, quiet decisions that unfold across lifetimes. Today we are looking at 10 perennial fruit trees that can do exactly that. Trees with lifespans that stretch decades, trees that increase in productivity as they age, trees that, in the right conditions, become some of the most valuable living things on a piece of land. Some of these will surprise you, and the tree we finish on has a legacy few others in the plant world can match. But before we get into the list, I want to ask you something. Drop your country in the comments and tell me which fruit tree has been growing the longest in your family. An old apple tree in a grandparent's yard, a fig someone planted 50 years ago that still produces every summer. I want to hear those stories. Stay with me through the whole list because later on I am going to cover one of the most important things most home orchardists never think about until a tree fails early. It changes everything about how you plant and care for long-lived trees. Let us start at the beginning. Section 1. Why perennial fruit trees matter. Most of us learn to garden with annuals. You plant in spring, you harvest in summer or fall, and then the plant is finished. The cycle resets. Next year, you do it again. There is nothing wrong with that. Annual vegetables have a place in every productive garden, but they also require you to start over every single year. Every season demands fresh labor, fresh seed, fresh effort. You're essentially rebuilding your food system from zero each spring. Perennial fruit trees work on a completely different logic. You plant once, the root system establishes, the canopy builds year by year, and the harvests, once they begin, do not stop. They actually improve with age for many species. A 10-year-old apple tree produces more and better fruit than a 5-year-old one. A 20-year-old pear is more productive than a 10-year-old pear. The investment compounds over time rather than resetting. From a food security perspective, this is profound. A small planting of well-chosen perennial fruit trees can provide more reliable, more abundant food over a 20-year period than almost any equivalent area of annual vegetables. And it does so with progressively less effort as the trees mature and the root systems require less supplemental watering, less fertilization, and less intervention. Then there's the legacy dimension. Some of the trees we are discussing today routinely live for 50, 100, even several hundred years under the right conditions. A tree planted by a gardener in their 30s may still be producing fruit when that gardener is long gone. In that sense, planting a perennial fruit tree is an act that reaches beyond a single lifetime. It's a gift left in the ground for people not yet born. But some fruit trees do not just live for years, they become family landmarks. The tree that was always there, the one the whole neighborhood knew about, the one whose fruit tasted like something from before everything got complicated. And the trees at the top of this list are the ones most capable of becoming exactly that. Section 2. What makes a fruit tree truly valuable? Before we get into the countdown, let us briefly establish what we are actually measuring when we call a tree long-lived and valuable. Lifespan matters, but it is not everything. A tree that lives for 200 years but stops producing meaningful harvests after 30 is not the same as one that lives for 70 years and increases in productivity for the majority of that time. True long-term value comes from the combination of productive lifespan, the number of years a tree is actively producing meaningful harvests, plus resilience under varying conditions, manageable care requirements, and adaptability to different climates.
The best perennial fruit trees also tend to improve with minimal intervention after establishment. They develop deep root systems that make them drought tolerant. They build structural strength that makes them less vulnerable to storm damage. They often require less intervention from the gardener as they age, not more. Pollination requirements are also worth understanding from the beginning. Some of the trees on this list are self-fertile, meaning a single tree will produce fruit without another tree of the same species nearby. Others require cross-pollination from a second compatible variety to produce a full harvest. We will flag this for each tree so you know exactly what to plan for. The trees that rise to the top of this list are the ones where the investment made in year one pays dividends for decades in ways that genuinely could not be achieved any other way. Now let us count them down. Number 10. Citrus. Citrus trees are an extraordinary starting point for this list because they represent something that many gardeners in temperate climates never get to experience, a tree that produces fruit in winter when almost nothing else in the garden is actively giving you food. Lemons, oranges, mandarins, grapefruits, and kumquats all fall within the citrus family, and the range of flavors, uses, and growing conditions they represent is enormous. In terms of productive lifespan, well-maintained citrus trees commonly produce for 50 years or more. There are documented citrus trees in Mediterranean regions and parts of California that have been producing continuously for well over a century. In their preferred climates, they are genuinely long-term investments. Citrus thrives in USDA zones 9 through 11, with some hardier varieties pushing into zone 8 with protection. They prefer warm, sunny conditions with mild winters. Lemons and limes are generally the most cold-sensitive. Satsuma mandarins and certain varieties of orange tolerate brief cold spells better than most. For container growing, citrus is among the most rewarding options available. Dwarf varieties in large containers, 15 to 25 gallons or larger, can be grown in cooler climates and brought indoors or into a greenhouse during frost season. Container citrus can produce meaningful harvests for decades with proper care. Citrus begins fruiting within 2 to 5 years depending on whether you start from seed or grafted stock. Grafted trees fruit significantly sooner. A well-established citrus tree can produce hundreds of fruits per year. Care requirements include consistent watering during dry periods, regular fertilization with a citrus-specific fertilizer rich in nitrogen and micronutrients, and protection from frost in marginal climates. Citrus does not require heavy pruning, but benefits from occasional shaping to maintain air circulation. The most common beginner mistake with citrus is planting in poorly draining soil. Citrus roots do not tolerate waterlogged conditions. A raised bed, mound planting, or excellent drainage is essential. From a legacy perspective, citrus trees planted in appropriate climates can produce fruit for grandchildren and great-grandchildren. In many Mediterranean and subtropical cultures, old citrus trees are considered family treasures passed down through generations. A fascinating historical note: citrus fruits were so highly prized in ancient Rome and medieval Europe that possessing citrus trees was considered a mark of wealth and status. Orangeries, the predecessor to the modern greenhouse, were built specifically to protect citrus collections through cold winters. But the next tree may surprise you with how well it performs in climates where citrus simply cannot survive.
Number 9. Pawpaw. If you are growing in North America and you have never grown a pawpaw, this entry may be the most useful discovery in this entire video. The pawpaw is North America's largest native fruit. It produces a custard-like fruit with a tropical flavor that is often described as a cross between a mango, a banana, and vanilla. It grows wild across the eastern United States and into parts of Canada, and it has been used as a food source for centuries. Productive pawpaw trees live and fruit reliably for 25 to 40 years. In some documented cases, pawpaw groves persist and spread vegetatively for much longer through root suckering. Pawpaw grows in USDA zones 5 through 9, making it one of the most cold-hardy fruit trees capable of producing tropical-style flavors. It is native to the eastern U.S. and naturally occurs in rich bottomland soils under forest canopy. It tolerates partial shade better than almost any other fruit tree, making it a valuable component of food forest designs. Container growing is possible, but challenging due to the pawpaw's deep taproot. Large containers of at least 25 gallons can work, but pawpaws genuinely thrive in the ground. Pawpaw requires cross-pollination from a second tree of a different variety for reliable fruiting. Plant at least 2 compatible varieties within proximity of each other. Trees begin bearing fruit at 4 to 7 years from planting, sometimes faster in warm climates. Care requirements are minimal once established. Pawpaw is naturally pest-resistant, partly because its leaves and bark contain compounds that many common insects avoid. Fertilization with a balanced organic fertilizer supports good growth. Watering is important during the establishment period and during dry spells. The most common beginner mistake is not planting 2 different varieties for pollination, which results in no fruit despite healthy-looking trees. The legacy value of pawpaw is deeply connected to American history. Native Americans cultivated pawpaw for centuries, and early European settlers relied heavily on the fruit as a food source. George Washington reportedly loved chilled pawpaw. Lewis and Clark documented eating pawpaw during their expedition. It is a fruit with deep roots in the North American story, and planting one today connects you to that history. Most gardeners underestimate how productive this one becomes with age, a mature pawpaw grove producing year after year with almost no intervention is one of the great underappreciated assets of the home food garden. Number 8. Fig. The fig is ancient, and that antiquity is part of what makes it so remarkable. Figs have been cultivated by humans for at least 5,000 years, possibly longer. They appear in some of the earliest agricultural records from the ancient Near East. They are mentioned throughout historical and religious texts from multiple cultures, and they are still growing today in the same regions where they were first cultivated millennia ago. Productive figs in ideal conditions can live and fruit for 100 years or more. In the Mediterranean, fig trees several centuries old are not uncommon. The fig's longevity, combined with its extraordinary productivity, places it among the most valuable perennial food plants a gardener can grow. Figs thrive in USDA zones 7 through 11. In zone 6 and sometimes 5, they can survive with winter protection, particularly when grown against a south-facing wall that captures and retains heat. For container growing, fig is one of the best options on this list. Container culture actually suits figs well. Root restriction in a large pot encourages earlier fruiting and can limit the tree's ultimate size, making it manageable in small spaces. Bring container figs indoors during severe winters. Most common fig varieties are self-fertile, meaning you do not need a second tree for fruit production. This makes fig a particularly convenient choice for small gardens. Trees begin producing within 2 to 3 years from planting, sometimes faster in warm climates. Care is straightforward once established. Figs tolerate drought once established better than most fruit trees. Pruning in late winter maintains shape and encourages productive new growth. Feeding with a balanced fertilizer in spring supports strong new shoots. The most common beginner mistake is overwatering. Figs in poorly draining or consistently wet soil develop root problems that affect long-term health and productivity. The legacy value of fig is embedded in human culture at a level few other plants reach. To plant a fig is to participate in one of the oldest continuing relationships between humans and the plants they grow. A fig tree planted today in the right climate could easily outlive not just the gardener who planted it, but the next generation as well.
Number 7. Mulberry. Mulberry does not always appear on lists of prestigious fruit trees, and that is a mistake. In terms of raw productivity, ease of care, and sheer longevity, the mulberry is one of the most formidable food trees available to homegrowers. Mulberries are fast-growing, generous, and persistent. They are difficult to kill once established.
They produce fruit in abundance, sometimes almost overwhelming abundance, and they provide that fruit for decades with minimal fuss. Well-grown mulberry trees routinely live for 75 to 100 years. Some documented specimens are considerably older. The tree produces fruit reliably throughout its long life. Mulberry covers a wide range of climate zones depending on species. The white mulberry, Morus alba, is hardy to USDA Zone 4. The red mulberry, Morus rubra, is equally cold hardy. The black mulberry, Morus nigra, often considered the finest in flavor, prefers zones 6 through 10. Container growing is possible with mulberry, particularly with dwarf cultivars. A container of 30 gallons or more supports a productive container mulberry that can be managed for small spaces. Most mulberry varieties are self-fertile. Trees begin producing within 3 to 5 years from planting and reach peak productivity within 8 to 10 years. A mature mulberry can produce 30 to 50 pounds of fruit per season, sometimes significantly more. Care is minimal after establishment. Mulberries are drought-tolerant, pest-resistant, and adapt to a wide range of soil types. Light annual pruning maintains structure. Very little else is required. The most common beginner mistake is underestimating the tree's size and mess. Mulberries produce abundant fruit that falls from the tree when ripe. Planting near patios, walkways, or light-colored surfaces will result in significant staining. Site the tree thoughtfully. The legacy value of mulberry is partly practical and partly ecological. Mulberry trees are exceptional wildlife habitat. They attract a wide range of birds and beneficial insects. In a food forest system, a mature mulberry tree functions as a generous canopy producer that supports the entire ecosystem around it. And this is where long-term food security becomes really interesting, because a mulberry tree on Homestead is not just producing food for the family, it is feeding the birds that control pest insects, attracting the pollinators that support other crops, and building soil health through decades of leaf litter. Mid-video section. Why some fruit trees produce for decades while others fail early. Before we continue with the top 6 trees on this list, I want to address something that will determine whether any of these trees ever reaches their long-term potential for you. Most fruit tree failures are not caused by bad trees. They are caused by bad decisions made at or before planting time. The first factor is site selection. Long-lived fruit trees need to be placed where they will be productive for decades. That means full sun for most varieties, at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight daily. It means good drainage, because the single most consistent killer of established fruit trees is root rot from waterlogged soil. And it means enough space for the tree to reach its mature size without being crowded by structures, utility lines, or competing vegetation. The second factor is soil health. Fruit trees planted into depleted, compacted, or chemically damaged soil struggle from day one. Before planting any long-lived tree, invest in the soil. Add compost, test pH, and adjust if necessary. The root system that develops in those first 2 to 3 years will determine the tree's structure and resilience for the next 50. The third factor is watering practice during establishment. Young fruit trees need consistent moisture for the first 2 to 3 years while their root systems develop. Not waterlogging, but consistent access to water during dry periods. Trees that experience water stress during establishment develop weaker root architecture that affects long-term performance. The fourth factor is pruning approach. Fruit trees pruned correctly in their early years develop strong central structure that holds heavy crops without branch failure. Trees left unpruned or pruned incorrectly develop weak angles and crowded canopies that cause problems for decades. Learn the basic pruning principles for the specific trees you are growing. 1 hour of pruning knowledge applied in year 2 can protect a tree structure for 30 years. The fifth factor is patience. Many gardeners push young fruit trees for early production by allowing the tree to carry fruit before its structure is strong enough to support it. Removing fruit from young trees for the first 1 to 2 seasons, painful as it feels, encourages the tree to invest energy in root and structural development that pays back dramatically in long-term productivity. Get these 5 factors right, and the trees at the top of this list will reward you for a very long time. Now, back to the countdown. Number 6, olive. If you want to understand what a truly ancient fruit tree looks like, study the olive. There are olive trees alive today that were growing when the Roman Empire was at its peak. Some documented ancient olives in the Mediterranean have been dated over 2,000 years. The olive is not just a long-lived fruit tree, it is one of the oldest known cultivated plants in human history. In suitable climates, a well-planted olive tree can realistically produce fruit for several human lifetimes. The productive lifespan of an olive tree is genuinely open-ended in ideal conditions. There are century-old olives in California producing commercial harvests every year. Olive thrives in USDA zones 8 through 11, with some cold-hardy varieties pushing into zone 7 with protection. It demands full sun, excellent drainage, and a Mediterranean-style climate, with warm, dry summers and mild winters. High humidity and prolonged cold are the olive's primary enemies. Container growing is excellent for olive. The tree's naturally compact growth, tolerance of root restriction, and slow growth rate make it one of the best long-term container candidates available. A dwarf olive in a large pot can produce fruit for decades indoors or on a sheltered patio. Most common olive varieties require cross-pollination for optimal fruiting, though some cultivars produce well as single trees. Olives begin producing fruit within 3 to 5 years from grafted stock and reach meaningful productivity at around 8 to 10 years. Care requirements are modest. Olive is highly drought-tolerant once established. Annual pruning to open the canopy is the primary maintenance task. Fertilization needs are light compared to most fruit trees. The most common beginner mistake is planting olive in heavy, poorly draining soil or in climates with wet winters. Both reliably cause failure. From a legacy perspective, to plant an olive is to participate in something that spans civilizations. The olive branch as a symbol of peace, the oil that lit ancient temples, the groves that shaped Mediterranean culture for 3,000 years. Planting an olive tree is a statement about time, patience, and permanence that few other garden decisions can match. The next tree can outlive many of the homes built around it.
Number 5. Pecan. The pecan is the only major nut tree on this list that is native to North America, and it earns its place here through a combination of extraordinary longevity, remarkable productivity at maturity, and a flavor profile that needs no introduction to anyone who has eaten a fresh cracked pecan from a tree they know. Pecan trees routinely live for 200 to 300 years. There are wild pecan groves in the American Southeast that were standing before European colonization. A planted pecan tree is genuinely a multi-generational investment. Pecan grows best in USDA zones 6 through 9. It prefers deep, fertile, well-draining soil and requires long, warm summers to ripen nuts fully. Climate is the primary limiting factor for pecan, as it does not perform well in cold northern climates or short-season areas. Container growing is not well suited for pecan due to its vigorous root system and eventual large size. This is a tree for the ground, ideally planted where it will have space to become the landmark it is capable of becoming. Pecan requires cross-pollination for reliable nut production. Plant at least 2 compatible varieties. The significant caveat with pecan is patience. Most pecan trees do not begin producing meaningful harvests until 7 to 10 years from planting, with full productivity typically taking 12 to 15 years to develop. But once a mature pecan tree is producing, the harvests can be extraordinary. A well-established pecan at peak production can yield several hundred pounds of nuts per season. Care during establishment focuses on consistent watering and appropriate fertilization. Mature pecans require zinc supplementation in many soils, and zinc deficiency is the most common cause of poor production in established trees. Annual zinc application is straightforward preventative maintenance. The most common beginner mistake is impatience. Gardeners who plant pecan expecting quick results are often disappointed. Those who plant it for the long term are rewarded in ways that compound for generations. The legacy value of pecan may be the most profound of any nut tree in North America. A pecan tree planted by your grandfather that is now producing harvests for your children and grandchildren is not a metaphor. It is a real and common experience in the American South, where old pecan trees are among the most valued features of historic properties. Number 4. Chestnut. The chestnut is in some ways the most utilitarian tree on this list. It produces a starchy, nutritious nut that has historically served as a staple food for populations across Europe and Asia. In periods of food scarcity, chestnut trees fed entire communities. They earned the title bread tree in parts of Italy and France, where chestnut flowers sustained people through difficult winters for centuries. Chestnut trees can live for 500 years or more under ideal conditions. Several ancient chestnut trees in Europe are considered national monuments. The productive lifespan of a well-planted chestnut tree extends far beyond any individual gardener's lifetime. Chestnut grows in USDA zones 4 through 9, with species variations covering most of the temperate world. The Chinese chestnut, Castanea mellistoma, is resistant to chestnut blight and is the recommended species for North American planting. Japanese and European chestnuts also offer excellent options depending on climate. Container growing is feasible for young chestnut trees, but the tree's eventual size and root requirements make this a long-term in-ground choice for maximum legacy value. Chestnut requires cross-pollination and benefits strongly from having 2 or more different varieties planted in proximity. Trees begin producing nuts within 3 to 5 years from grafted stock, with full productivity developing at around 8 to 12 years to develop. But once a mature chestnut tree is producing, the harvests can be extraordinary. A well-established chestnut at peak production can yield several hundred pounds of nuts per season. Care during establishment focuses on consistent watering and appropriate fertilization. Mature chestnuts require zinc supplementation in many soils, and zinc deficiency is the most common cause of poor production in established trees. Annual zinc application is straightforward preventative maintenance. The most common beginner mistake is planting the wrong species. The American chestnut, Castanea dentata, was virtually eliminated from North American forests by chestnut blight in the early 20th century. Planting American chestnut without blight-resistant genetics is unlikely to produce a long-lived tree. Choose the Chinese chestnut or a blight-resistant hybrid. As a food forest tree, chestnut is extraordinary. It produces food in abundance, supports wildlife, builds deep soil through its substantial leaf litter, and grows into a large, generous canopy tree that provides shade and beauty for decades. But the number 1 tree has a reputation few others can match.
Number 3. Persimmon. The persimmon is not yet the most famous fruit tree in the Western world, but among experienced orchardists and food forest designers, it is spoken of with genuine reverence. Here's why. The persimmon is one of the lowest maintenance, highest performing, most resilient fruit trees available to home growers in a wide range of climates. It tolerates drought, tolerates heavy soil, tolerates neglect, tolerates fluctuating temperatures, and keeps producing beautiful, nutritious fruit anyway. It seems determined to provide food whether you work hard for it or not. Persimmon trees routinely live for 60 to 100 years or more. The American persimmon, Diospyros virginiana, is documented at over 100 years in some cases. The Japanese persimmon, Diospyros kaki, is widely grown in cultivation and known to produce for many decades. American persimmon grows in USDA zones 4 through 9. Japanese persimmon grows in zones 7 through 10. Between the 2 species, persimmon covers most of North America and a vast range of the temperate world. Container growing is possible for Japanese persimmon with smaller cultivars, but the tree is most valuable when planted in the ground where it can develop its full root system. American persimmon is typically self-fertile, though cross-pollination improves yields. Japanese persimmon varieties vary, with some self-fertile and others requiring a pollinator.
Trees begin fruiting within 3 to 5 years from grafted stock, with full production developing over a longer period. Care is genuinely minimal. Established persimmons require almost no supplemental watering in most climates. Light annual pruning to maintain structure is the primary task. Fertilization needs are modest. The most common beginner mistake with Japanese persimmon is harvesting too early. The fruit must be fully ripe, often falling from the tree naturally before it is sweet. Underripe astringent varieties are unpleasant to eat. Patience at harvest is essential. The legacy value of persimmon lies in its combination of reliability, longevity, and the fact that it produces fruit in fall when most other harvests are complete. A persimmon tree in a food forest provides late-season nutrition for both the household and for wildlife preparing for winter. It is, in many ways, the quiet, steady provider of the orchard. Number 2. Pear. The pear tree is one of the most celebrated long-lived fruit trees in agricultural history, and its reputation is fully deserved. Pear trees are slower to reach full productivity than apple trees, but they live significantly longer. The extra patience required is repaid across a much longer timeline of abundant harvests. Documented pear trees in Europe, planted in the 18th and 19th centuries, are still producing fruit today. Centuries-old pear trees exist in old estate gardens, monastery orchards, and historic properties across the temperate world. Under good conditions, productive pear trees commonly reach 75 to 100 years of age. Some documented European specimens are considerably older. Pear grows best in USDA zones 4 through 8, covering most of the temperate northern hemisphere. It tolerates cold better than many fruit trees and produces excellent fruit across a wide range of soil types. Dwarf and semi-dwarf pear varieties can be container grown in large pots, though standard pear trees develop the most impressive longevity in the ground. Most pear varieties benefit significantly from cross-pollination. Planting 2 compatible varieties ensures reliable and generous harvests. Trees begin fruiting within 3 to 7 years depending on rootstock and variety, with full production developing over a longer period. Care includes annual winter pruning to maintain structure, appropriate fertilization in spring, and consistent watering during dry periods while young. Established pear trees develop considerable drought tolerance. The most common beginner mistake is choosing the wrong variety for their climate. Asian pear and European pear varieties have different climate preferences and storage characteristics. Research which varieties perform well in your specific region before planting. The legacy of a pear tree is deeply woven into European and North American agricultural history. Old pear trees were common landmarks on farms and homesteads because they provided reliable harvests for generation after generation. A pear tree you plant today on a property that stays in a family could still be producing when your great-grandchildren are grown. Number 1. Apple. Some decisions you make in a garden are made for the season. Others are made for the year, and a few are made for the lifetime and beyond. Planting an apple tree is in that third category. The apple is not just the most widely grown fruit tree in the temperate world, it is, in many ways, the defining fruit tree of human history. Apple cultivation spans more than 4,000 years of recorded history. Thousands of named apple varieties have been developed across centuries of selective growing. Apple trees are present in the agricultural heritage of nearly every temperate culture that has ever existed. And the best apple trees are extraordinary in their longevity. Standard apple trees grown on their own roots or vigorous rootstocks commonly live for 100 years or more. There are recorded apple trees in England, Europe, and North America that are several centuries old and still producing fruit. An apple tree planted on a stable, well-chosen site is potentially the longest producing food investment you will ever make. Apple grows in USDA zones 3 through 8, covering an enormous geographic range. Cold-hardy varieties push the boundary of Zone 3, heat-tolerant varieties extend into warmer climates.
The range of apple varieties suited to different climates is broader than almost any other temperate fruit tree. Container growing works well for dwarf apple trees in large pots. Apple containers can be grown on patios, balconies, and in small urban gardens and can produce meaningful harvests for many years. Most apple varieties require cross-pollination from another compatible variety. Research your chosen variety's pollination group before purchasing. Trees begin producing fruit within 2 to 5 years depending on rootstock, with full production developing over 8 to 12 years. Pruning is the most important care practice for apple trees. Annual winter pruning that maintains an open canopy, removes crossing wood, and encourages productive new spur development is the foundation of a healthy apple tree over decades. Trees that are not pruned regularly develop overly dense canopies, poor fruit quality, and eventual structural weakness. The most common beginner mistake is planting a single variety without a compatible pollinator nearby, and then spending years wondering why the tree never fruits. The legacy value of the apple tree is difficult to overstate. In early North American history, apple orchards were planted at homesteads because apple trees provided food, cider, and a form of stored calories that sustained families through hard winters. Johnny Appleseed is a cultural legend because what he represented, planting apple trees as a gift to future settlers, captured something true about what apple orchards meant to people who depended on them. An apple tree planted today, in the right climate, on the right site, pruned correctly and cared for in its early years, could be producing fruit for 100 years. The people who harvest those apples in 50 years will not know your name, but they will have fruit in their hands because of a decision you made. That is what a living legacy looks like. The harvest and legacy payoff. Think forward for a moment. 20 years from now. The persimmon tree you planted is producing more heavily than it ever has. The pear tree, once a sapling you staked against the wind, has become a broad, generous tree that drops golden fruit every fall. The apple tree that looked so small the first season has a canopy wide enough to sit under on a warm afternoon. Children who were not born when you planted these trees are picking fruit from them. They do not know what the trees looked like at planting. They have only ever known them as abundant, permanent things, as part of the landscape, part of the land. That is the return on a perennial fruit tree investment. Not just food, not just the money saved on grocery bills, though that is real and significant over decades. Not just the satisfaction of growing something yourself. It is permanence. It is the quiet act of building something that outlasts you. It is the deeply human instinct to plant for those who come after, even when you will never meet them. The best orchards in the world are not the newest ones. They are the old ones, the ones planted by people who were thinking forward, who looked at a small tree and saw decades of harvests, who planted in the faith that the future was worth preparing for. You can start that today, with a single tree, on whatever land you have. Let's bring this together. We have covered 10 perennial fruit trees, from the cold-hardy pawpaw of North American forests to the ancient olive groves of the Mediterranean, from the patient pecan to the generous mulberry, from the celebrated apple to the underrated persimmon. Every one of these trees is capable of producing food for decades. The best of them can produce for lifetimes. The common thread is time. These trees are investments measured not in seasons, but in years and decades. They require patience in the early stages and reward that patience with harvests that build and deepen as the tree matures. They support wildlife, they build soil, they provide shade and beauty, and in the best cases, they become landmarks on a piece of land, loved by people across multiple generations who never imagined growing them, but are grateful every year that someone did. Now, I want to hear from you. If you could plant only one fruit tree to leave behind as a living legacy, which one would you choose? The enduring apple, the ancient olive, the extraordinary pecan, or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments. And if this video helped you think differently about what your garden could become over the long term, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't yet. We cover fruit trees, food forests, container growing, and practical homesteading on this channel, and there is a lot more ahead. Until next time, keep growing, keep learning, and give your garden every chance to thrive.